Hello students, so this is your second lesson in Unity and I'm gonna go over what we did yesterday real quick before we start coding and making our player actually moving. So yesterday what we did, we created objects like a square and then we moved it around, we changed the size of the square to make it into a platform, and then we changed the color from the color section. So I'm gonna make my ground, and then I will also rename it into ground. We said we want to name them so it's easier for us to follow them later and figure out what is what. And then I will create another object, and this time it will be another square, and the square will be our player, so I'm gonna call it player, and I will give it somewhat a reddish color, somewhere around there. Yeah. So now if I went to my scene, I can see it. Again, the scene is where you design, the game is how the game will look like. So what if I don't like the blue background? This is something we didn't talk about before. You can go to the main camera up here on the left corner and then change the background color. You can select whatever color you want. So I'm gonna go with something more or less like this, just to be easy on the eyes for now. We definitely can change it at any point, at any time. Okay, so I have this scene, and then I ask you all to go ahead and build a tiny level. So let's do that. I'm going to duplicate. So if I selected my ground layer or my ground object, I can hit Control D. Control D makes a copy of it, and then I can slide it up here. So now it's still named ground and it looks exactly like the other one. So I'm gonna just make a tiny gap so I can test my jumping abilities. Alright, then we said we need to add some component to our player so they do stuff. So now if I run the game, as you can see, nothing happened. It's just a static image because I didn't tell my game, hey, I need you to have physics. So next we are going to add the physics, and as you all remember, we added a rigid body component and we made sure it's the 2D one. And then, by the way, I'm selecting the player, which player, I forgot to change the name. Okay, and then we added the rigid body component 2D, and then we also added a collider, or a box collider, because I'm dealing with a box. If you're dealing with a capsule, you will do the capsule collider, and so on and so forth. Make sure you select the 2D colliders, because we are in a 2D environment. If you pick the 3D, it's not gonna work for you. And then the same thing will happen to the ground. I will add the box collider. Let's say I have two grounds and I don't want to add a collider for everyone separately. What can I do to add a collider to all of them at the same time? I can select the first ground over here and hit the control button and select the other ground. And now I highlighted them both, and I can just go to add component and add a box collider. So if we did this correctly, we should end up here, which we did yesterday, right? So I have my player sitting on the ground, but it's not doing anything else. All right, let's take it one step farther now and make our player move. So to make your player move, we need to create a script, a code that will tell my player, hey, I want you to move. So to do that, let's be neat and organized. Down here in the project, it says asset, right? I want you to right click on it and go to create and do folder and name it script. This is not an essential part. It's not very important, but this just to make it organized and easy to follow for future reference. When you want to fix something about your game or do anything, you know where to go. So we will start by opening the script folder we just created. So now we are in asset, in script. All right, this is an empty folder where we can put our code in. So I want to create a new code for the player movement. And this is an important part. Names are really critical and crucial to your game. Make sure the name you are naming your folder or your files are exactly spelled correct. Because if they are spelled wrong, sometimes the system cannot recognize them, and you will be fighting it over and over again trying to figure out what's wrong with it, and it just one letter, even capitalization matters in this case. All right, so we will create our script. So right click, create C# scripts. All right, so our first script will be the player movement. So I'm gonna write capital P player and then capital M movement. Make sure you spell it the same way I do. If you spelled it other ways, make sure to remember how you spelled it, because that will be important later. All right, now we have a file here, right? It will load for a second, and I have my player. I can select my player, and now I want to add the script to my player. What I'm gonna do is I will hold the script, I will drag it to my player, and then just drop it down here at the very bottom. And there you go, you have a player movement script. So let's test it out now. We will hit the play button again. Well, I have a movement script, but I'm pressing everything on my keyboard and nothing happened. Well, because I have the movement script, but I didn't write anything in it. So make sure you're out of the play mode, because if you're not, nothing will be saved. And then double click on your script code. When you open it, it will open in a new window. Let's just give it a minute so it opens. So this is what you are going to see. It's just a bunch of codes, something similar to what we saw day one that I went over really quick. So let's go over it again. So using system collections, so we're using a file someone already created. It's Microsoft. This one also was made by Microsoft. And then finally, Unity engine. This is the most important file we're using. This is what makes our game easy to develop, because Unity created this engine for us, and it makes our life a million times easier. Okay, so we have everything set up. Now let's start writing our code. All right, important things to know. Everything you are writing in your code need to be within these two brackets. You see those gold brackets on my screen? They might be a different colors in yours. All the code you write has to be in between those two. Anything out of those two brackets will not work for you. And then any code that you want to kickstart at the beginning of the game need to be inside this void, the void that is named start. And anything that you want to happen multiple times need to be inside the update void. So this is very important and very crucial. So let's go ahead and start writing our player movement code. So one important thing is when we want to move our player, we need to use physics. And the rigid body we added to our player, if you all remember it. I'm going to go real quick back to the scene over here. And if I clicked on my player, we have something called rigid body 2D. This is a physics object or a physics component. It has the mass of the player, it has the gravity scale, it has everything related to physics, so we don't have to do it. The game already did it for us, or Unity already did it for us. So that's the first thing we're gonna code into our game. So we want to call it, and I will write public rigid body. And then I will write 2D. Make sure you're spelling it correctly. Capital R at the end and capital D at the end. If you didn't do it this way, it's not gonna work. And now we can name it whatever we want. I will name it RB for a shortcut, because RB means rigid body. And then when you end with your line, you hit the semicolon. All right, now we made it public. What does that mean? When you make it public, if you go back to your game or the Unity engine and you scroll down, you can see RB is publicly displayed on this inspector sheet. So I'm selecting a player and I can see the RB is over here. So what would happen if I changed it from public to private? Let's try that. So if you made it private, it does not show it up anymore. So sometimes you want to keep some stuff private because you don't want people to mess around with it, but some other times you want to make them public so it's easier for you to control it. All right, so in this case, we're going to make it public. Okay, and what does that mean? That means if I came here to the game, working screen, I can go ahead and drag my rigid body, I'm holding it with my mouse, and drop it down here. So now RB in my code refers to this rigid body system. So what if I don't want to drag it and I want the game to automatically drags it for me? Because I don't want to be dragging it every time I'm making a new player, right? So we can make that, and it's pretty simple actually. So what we need to do is we need to go to start. So at the beginning of the game, I will call RB. And then I will say RB now equals to get component. And then I will open those tiny brackets. And inside here, I'm just going to write rigid body 2D. And then I will close with two parentheses and then semicolon. All right. And that means at the beginning of the game, when I hit the play button in the game, I want you to automatically call my rigid body into action. And then Control S to save. You make sure to hit Control S every time you're done writing the code. Otherwise, it's not gonna apply to the game. So let's test it right now. So I will go back here and I will remove it. I will just select none. So now there is nothing on my rigid body. If I hit play, as you can see, rigid body showed up again, right? So it automatically calls it. If I canceled it again, it won't call it because it's not on the update. But if I went out and I went back in the play mode, you can see it calls it automatically again. And that's very important because we need physics to move our player. All right, right now it's still not moving because we haven't gave it the moving command yet. Okay, so let's go back to our code, and now we want to create a moving command. So to do that, first thing we need to do is we need to decide how fast our player is going to move. So we need to give it a speed. So I will go ahead and put a public and float. Float is just a data type that controls numbers. So float is just numbers. So, and then I will call that speed. And as you can see, I'm spelling everything with low cases. Don't do it with upper cases in this situation. All right, so we created a float called speed. We will decide how fast it goes. And in fact, if you went back to the game, now speed is down here and you can easily change it to whatever number you want. I'm gonna put it 10 for now. So my player speed is 10, and feel free to change it to whatever you want. The faster it is, the harder to control. All right, now we're done with that. Now we will create one more float. This one is controlling our keyboard buttons. So since it's controlling our keyboard buttons, we don't want it to be public. We want it to be private because we don't want people to mess with that. So we will do a private float and we will call it move horizontally. So move H, which means move horizontally. You're welcome to name it move horizontally, but we just want to make it short because we know what is a move and we know what is H. And as you can see, I'm using an uppercase H. You are welcome to use uppercase, but make sure it's not the first letter. The last letter or in the middle, it could be an uppercase. All right, so private float move H. All right, now we will go to our update function. This function happens once per frame. So if your computer is running 60 frames per second, it will happen one time every 60 frame, which is important to know this info here because it affects the way the game play. And in the future, I'm going to show you another way to do it where it's going to be more stable and better for your game performance. So now let's use the move H to call the moving buttons from our keyboard. So I will call move H, and then I will say move H is equal to input. Input means something you add or you do, and then get axis, and then in parentheses, I'm gonna do horizontal. And you have to spell horizontal correctly here because this name is specific to Unity. Like it won't work any other way or any other places. It will only work in Unity. So make sure you spell horizontal correctly. Semicolon at the end. And now we called it, but nothing will happen if we try to move the player yet because we didn't attach the speed to it. All right, so how do we add the speed to it? We use the physics. Remember, RB is our physics component. So I will do RB dot velocity. Velocity, as you all know, it's a term in physics talking about how fast something is moving. And then the velocity have two components, X and Y. So we need to control our velocity on the X-axis, basically horizontally, and our velocity on the Y-axis, which is vertically. So to do that, we need to use something called vector. So we will do new vector 2, which means vector 2D. And then in this vector now we will set the X and the Y. So X and Y. So what would be our X in this case? We will do the move H. We will multiply it by speed. So we want it to move on the horizontal axis as fast as we want it to go. And then what do we do to the Y? The Y, we don't want to change it, so we will write RB dot velocity and then dot Y, which means just keep it the same. I don't want to deal with it. And then a semicolon at the end. Semicolons are important at the end of every line. All right, now let's go back to the game and let's test it out. So if you didn't have any red stuff down here or in the console page, this one, then you're good. So let's go ahead and play it and see what happens. All right, so I can use AD or the arrows to move my player. And as you can see, it's moving. But nothing else is moving except the player. I can't go up and down. I can't jump, right? But at least my box now is going left and right, which is amazing. It's great. Everything is working perfectly. Now, let's add a jumping ability. I want my player to be able to jump. So out of the play and back to my code. So I will double click on the script again to open it up. Or you can just find it down there. All right, so we added our horizontal movement. Now we want to add the jump movement, right? So let's do that. Let's go down up here. Actually, let's do it up here. And let's add another public float. This is the number that will control how high we are jumping, and we can call it jump. All right, so now I want to jump, and I don't want to be able to jump anytime. I only want to be able to jump when I hit the space bar. So I will do if statement. If means if this condition is true, the condition goes here, the action happen. So you can have a lot of conditions. It doesn't have to be one condition. So I want to say if input, if I basically pressed and get button down. Again, make sure that you're spelling it correctly. Capital G, capital B, capital D. So I said if I pressed the jump button, I want to jump. So how do Unity know that the jump button is the space bar? We will go over that in a second. So I told it if I pressed the button of jumping, I want to be able to jump. So now I will hit enter. Oh, I didn't tell it I want to be able to jump yet. I just said if I hit the jumping button, so now I will hit enter, and then down here I will open a bracket. So you hold shift and you hit the bracket one. And that means everything in this bracket will happen if this condition is true. All right, so inside here what we want to do is we want to say RB, which is our rigid body, dot add force. So we want to add force to our object, like we want to push it because it's a jump, right? It's a push toward the up. So we want to add force, and then we will do new vector because you can add your force into vertical and horizontal, and again remember it's x and y. This time the x, we don't want to mess with it, so we will do rb dot velocity dot x, because we will be like, hey, we don't want to mess with the x. And this time the y will be jump. So that basically tells our game, hey, if I hit the jump button, I want to be able to jump this amount of points. Like, make sure you spelled it correctly. All right, so let's save it, go back to our game. If I went back to my player over there and I scroll down, I can see jump, and it's 0 right now. Let's make the jump to 250. So again, before we test it, how do Unity know what horizontal mean and what jump mean? Those are things we can set up ourselves. So if you go to the edit and then you go to the project setting, and you can go to not to the player, to the input manager, and then if you go down to the axis, it tells you there is something called horizontal. All those buttons work for horizontal. There is something called jump. All those buttons work for jump, like the space bar is the only one. So this is where we control our movement from, but we don't have to worry about it for now. Okay, so we said speed is 10 and jump to 50. Let's try it and see what happens. All right, now if I hit the jump button, you can see my player jump. I can move and jump. But there is an issue. I can hit it a million times and my player will just keep jumping forever. Like, nothing controls how many jumps we have. Can you jump in the air in real life? No. So we want to stop the player from doing that. We want it to only jump once and not jump a million times while it's in the air. So let's work on that. Okay. To do that, we need to... I'm just gonna fix that real quick. Okay, to do that we need to work on our jumping condition. So we're gonna add a condition for jumping, and that will be a public bool. Bool means it's a true or false, and we will ask it a question: is jumping... Okay, so if is jumping is true, that means the player is suspended in the air, which means nothing should be able to happen. Like, we should not be able to jump again. We are just able to move left and right. And if is jumping is false, then I want to be able to jump. So in this situation, we're going to go back to our condition. We said if we press the button, now we will say and, the double and, which is you hold shift and the number 7 on your keyboard, and is jumping double equal false. So that simply means if I press the button and is jumping is false, then I want to be able to jump. So let's test it out. Alright, so now we can see is jumping down here and it's automatically false. But when we start the game, so is jumping is false, so I'm able to jump, but I can still jump a million times. And then if I turned it on, if is jumping is true, I'm pressing the space bar and I can't jump anymore. But I don't want to have to do it manually every time I'm playing the game. I want it to happen automatically, right? So let's make that happen automatically. Okay, let's go back to our code, and we need to add a new void, just similar to those. This new void deals with collisions. Collisions mean when you hit this thing. You see this thing, we called it box collider. What happens when my collider hit another collider? That's what we need to control right now. So we will create a void called collision. So make sure you are over here. So you see this is a void update. Make sure you go underneath it, the last bracket. It will show you where the brackets start, and hit enter. Make sure you are inside this one. You don't want to be down here. You want to be in here, right? And we will write void, and then we will write on collision. Make sure you are spelling this correctly. If you spelled it wrong, it's not gonna work. Enter 2D. On collision, enter 2D. And then we will open a parentheses. Inside those parentheses, we will give it a parameter called collision Unity2D, and we will name it other, and we will open brackets down here. So now we just have something similar to the void update that is called collision enter 2D. That means whenever my player hits something, I want to check if whatever I write in here is true, and if it's true, I want something to happen. So if we open the parentheses, other dot, so other is referring to this, other dot game object dot compare tag equal ground. So the reason we are writing ground here is we decided to name everything that is floor ground. So we want to tell our game, hey, if the player hits something that is tagged as ground, not named as a ground, tagged as a ground, I want you to allow him to jump. Otherwise, I don't want to allow him to jump. So if we hit ground, we open the bracket, is jumping equal false. So the player is not jumping if they are touching the ground, right? If the player is not touching the ground, they are jumping. So we will go back to this if statement, and down here we will say is jumping equal true. What does that mean? Means after my player jumps, after I hit the bar and the player jumps, the player need to be in the air, so it is jumping automatically should be true. So I'm gonna write it down here. So this is what you will have for now. All right, let's go ahead and test it. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and test it. Well, we have an error. The error says I spelled collision wrong. See, you have it here down here on red, which is a good thing that happened. So I can show you an example. And I can see I spelled collision with a B instead of an N. So now let's see. All right, no errors. So I can jump. Sometimes it takes a minute to load. All right, so now I can jump, and it doesn't allow me to jump again. So what's going on? Why it's not allowing me to jump again? So we said in the code that we want the tag to be named ground, but have we changed the ground tag to ground? So let's look at those two grounds we have. Look at the tag, it's untagged, it doesn't have any tag. So we need to create a new tag for it that is called ground so we can use it. So make sure you exit the game and then go to the code and then add tag. I already added this tag, I'm just gonna delete it. All right, so in your case, you will get here and you will go to tag and you will hit, so I'm selecting the ground, that the object that I want to be a ground. And I will go to the tag and I will add tag and then I will name it ground. Make sure you spell it exactly the same way you spelled it in here. Make sure it's exactly spelled the same exact way. If it's not the same way, it's not gonna work. So now I will go to my ground. Actually, I'm gonna select both ground, control, and then select them both. And I will go and give them the ground tag. So now this one is a ground, tagged as a ground, and this one is also tagged as a ground. So now if and then we can tag our player as a player. It's going to be important later on, but let's just put it on right now. So let's test it now. So now I'm jumping. Every time I touch the ground, it's still not allowing me to jump for some reason. So let's see what could have we done that is wrong. Alright, I found the error. The reason it wasn't working because I spelled enter wrong. See, the spelling is really important. On collision enter. Now, if we hit the play button, now let's redo it. Now the game works. So I'm hitting space while I'm in the air, nothing happened, but when I'm on the ground, everything is working fine. So make sure the spelling is correctly on collision enter. Okay. The reason the spelling is important, we're using something called the Unity library, and those things are already named by Unity, so you cannot name it something different than what they did. Alright, so now our player is jumping, our player is moving, and everything is great for us. The only issue we have is the camera is not following our player. So next step is to create a code that makes the camera follow our player. So inside the script again, you will go to create, new C#, and I will call it camera and then movement. So it's capital C and capital M for movement. And that's my camera code, and then give it a minute to load and I will open it. Alright, so my camera code is just going to be an empty code again. See, it's called camera code. So now we have two of them next to each other. Make sure you don't get them confused. So for my camera, I will have to make the camera follow an object, right? And this object needs to be my player. So we will create a target and we will select our player as the target. So public, and then my target needs to be a game object because my player is a game object. And we will call it target. Okay. So we created the target object called, or the target game object called target. And then in the update where we want the camera to follow my player the whole time, we will tell the camera, hey, I want you to follow my player. To do that, we need to change the position of the camera. So you see this transform? What we need to do is we need to be able to change these positions, the X and the Y, so they are always following our player. So we need to tap into this. So how can we tap into this transform of the camera? We can do it easily by writing transform dot, and then what part of transform do we care about? We care about the position of the camera. So I will go transform dot position equal. So what do I want the new position to be? We will do new vector, and this time instead of vector 2 we will use vector 3. Why are we using vector 3 instead of vector 2? Because the camera has an X, Y, and a Z position. So we have 3 different positions we need to manipulate. So basically we will have X, Y, and Z. And that's what we need to manipulate in our case. So for our X position, we want the camera to follow the target X position. So I will go target dot transform dot position dot X. So I want, hey camera, follow my target position that is X. And then for the Y position, we will do the same thing. Target dot transform dot position dot Y. Alright, so it's a 2D game. My player is only moving on the X and a Y axis. So what do I want to do with the Z axis? I want it to be a fixed number, and I will put this number as -10. -10 is how far the camera is from your player. And I found out that 10 is a pretty good number for it. And of course, you're welcome to change it, manipulate it until you find something you're very comfortable with. So this is like how zoomed in and zoomed out the camera is. 10 is usually the sweet spot for us. Alright, so now we're gonna go to the game. We saved it, so the game is loading. And we will take the camera script and drag it into the camera. So now it says target and the target is empty. I will hit my player and drag it to the target. Now the camera will follow my player. So let's play and see how that will go. Okay, so I'm moving around and the camera is moving with my player, right? But I don't really like it because my player is centered on the screen. It doesn't really look appealing. I would like it if my player was a little bit offset. Like for example, if my player was this much offset, it will look nicer. So how can we do that? We can exit the game mode and we can go back to our code and do that. So what we want to do is another public float, and this time we'll call it y. Actually, let's do it offset y. Means we're gonna offset the y-axis. Alright, so this is just for an appearance that will make it better. So we want to offset the y-axis by this much, and this much is what we will decide. So I will go to my y part of the code, this part, and I will do plus offset y. That means my position will be following my player plus the offset amount. Control S to save. Now we can go back to the game, and we are still in the, we are not playing right now, we are in the development scene. What I can do is I can hold the offset amount and drag it. As you can see, nothing happens when I do that because the camera doesn't know yet where to go. So the best way to do this is to hit play, and then now you can slide the offset until you get to the sweet spot that you like. I like it about, this is personal preference, about here. So I'm gonna say 2.5 is where I like it to be. So now I will exit the game and I will write 2.5. If you kept it over there without exiting the play mode, it will automatically erase, so it's not going to go back to 2.5. So make sure you copy your number so you don't lose it. And now if I played, I can see my camera is offset, and hey, my player is moving, and it's great. Alright, so we're almost done with today's lesson, but just an empty box is kind of boring, right? Let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's give it an eye. So I will go to my player and I will right click on it and I will create a 2D sprite, and it will be a circle. So as you can see, this circle formed inside my player, which means my player is the parent of this circle. Wherever my player goes, this circle will go. So let's go ahead and give it an eye. So I'm zooming into my player. I will make the circle very small, like this, and I will move it up to this corner. So now if I played, as you can see, my player have an eye. But when I head to the other way, my player is moving backward. The eyes are not turning around with my player. So let's fix that problem. To fix it, we're gonna go to the player movement script, and in the player movement script over here, as you can see, we need to add that transformation that makes the player flip. So how do we do that? Let's go to the player and let's look at this scale. Let's try to put the x-axis scale to -1. So if the player scale is -1, the player looks to the opposite direction. If it's +1, the player look to the right direction. And then if it's -1, it looks to the left direction. Alright, so how can we manipulate this for our advantage? Let's look into that. So we said that movement is using horizontal. So let's do this. Let's make this movement into public. And let's see what happens when we do that. Public, and let's look at the player. So we have another one called H, and it has a value of 0. So let's play the game and let's look at it. So when I move to the right, you can see the number is going toward the positive, right? Oops, I did not mean to fall down there. Let's try it again. So when I move to the right, if you look at the number, it's going to the positive. When I move to the left, it's going to the negative. So that tells me, hey, to the right mean positive, to the left mean negative. So let's use that to our advantage. Okay, so that's how we're gonna use this. So we're going to go to the update function over here on the update. Alright, so as we said, we want to make it flip its face from right to left. So we will tell it if move h is small, or actually is smaller than 0, because as we can see, if it's going to the left, the move h will be smaller than 0. If we're going to the right, the move h will be bigger than 0. So we open brackets and we will say transform dot local scale, and local scale allow us to go here and control the scale of our player. So we go to local scale and then we will say equal to new vector 2. We can use vector 2 because we're only controlling the x and y. It's a 2D object. So what do we want for the x? We said that if we're going to the left, if the x is -1, it will look to the left, right? Then what do we want to do for the y? We want to keep the y the same. So transform dot local scale dot y. We don't want to mess with that. So, and then we will use an else statement. So you write else, and then you open the bracket, and you can copy the same thing and put it down here. What the else statement do, it says, okay, what happens if move h is bigger than 0? So what happens if we're moving to the right? What happens if we're moving to the right? We want our player to be +1, right? So now let's test it. This is a very simple way to do it. Make sure you have a semicolon at the end. This is not the best way to do it, but this is the simplest way to do it. So let's play and see. I'm going to the right. Now I'm going to the left. Now I'm going to the right. Now I'm going to the left. So as you can see, there is a tiny problem here, right? As soon as I stop going to the left, it automatically faces the right direction. And that because we told it that if it is 0, if it's less than 0, I want it to look to the left. If it is more than 0, or if anything else happens, I want it to look to the right. So we can fix that actually pretty simply. So instead of saying else, we can say else if you open parentheses and then move h now is bigger than 0. So that means if it's smaller than 0, this is what happens. If it's bigger than 0, this is what happens. So let's test it out and see if that will work. And let's see, I'm going to the right, nothing happened. I'm going to the left and I pause and it's still looking to the left. And hey, that's how we fix it. So I'm saying this is a simple way to do it because let's say my player is wider. Let's test it and see if that will work actually. Nope, it doesn't. It automatically shrinks it to 1 because we made it into a very simple face flipping code, which we can fix in the future and make it a more complicated one that allows any size player to function in. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that makes it easy to understand. And this is all for today. If you would like, you can make your game even better and make it more interesting, add more stuff to it. Until next time, thank you.